October 23, 2077, 9:47 a.m. Eastern Time. The first missiles left their silos, and 2 hours later, the world was gone. Every major city on the planet turned to ash and shadow in the span of a single morning. The vaults sealed. 400,000 Americans locked themselves underground while the surface burned at temperatures that vaporized concrete. When the fire stopped, the silence was worse. No governments, no armies, no plan for what came next. For 200 years, the wasteland has been trying to answer one question. Who fired first? China blamed America. America blamed China. The truth got buried under the fallout, and everyone who knew for certain died in the blast. But the real story starts decades earlier, in a world that had already been dying for a long time. The America of 2077 looked like a World's Fair that never ended. Chrome diners on every corner, nuclear cars in every driveway, and Mr. Handy robots serving cocktails in living rooms styled like 1950s magazine covers. Fusion power had finally cracked the energy crisis, at least for those who could afford it. Robco, General Atomics, and Poseidon Energy didn't just sell products. They owned the infrastructure, wrote the regulations, and bankrolled the politicians. Vault-Tec ran ads during prime time, selling spots in luxury fallout shelters like they were selling vacation homes. The propaganda was everywhere, bright and loud and relentless. Underneath the cherry pie optimism, the cracks showed. Food riots in Detroit, martial law in Alaska, protesters vanishing into military detention centers that didn't officially exist. But the billboard still promised a brighter tomorrow, powered by the atom. This gleaming world had a problem no one wanted to talk about, and it was running out fast. 2052, the year the oil stopped. Not a gradual decline, a cliff edge. The last viable reserves in the Middle East ran dry, and within months, the European Commonwealth and the Middle Eastern states were at each other's throats. Tanks rolled into cities that had stood for 3,000 years. By 2060, the United Nations held its final session and quietly dissolved. No dramatic speeches, just an empty building in New York and a realization that no one had the leverage to enforce peace anymore. Nations hoarded whatever resources they had left and eyed their neighbors' stockpiles. Fusion power arrived in 2066, clean and limitless, and 14 years too late. Europe had already collapsed into a patchwork of warring city-states. The Middle East was a radioactive crater, bombed by someone. Everyone blamed each other. By 2077, most of the world outside North America and China was a graveyard of failed states and burning oil fields. While the rest of the world burned itself out, America found a different path, one that would prove far more dangerous. In 2072, American power armor units rolled across the Canadian border. The official story was protection, safeguarding vital Alaskan supply lines from Chinese aggression. The real reason was simpler. Canada had the last oil reserves on the continent, and America needed them more than Canada needed sovereignty. The occupation was brutal. Canadian resistance fighters sabotaged pipelines, ambushed convoys, and held out in the wilderness for years. American forces responded with internment camps and martial law. Entire towns were relocated to make room for extraction facilities. By 2076, Canada ceased to exist as a nation, absorbed into the United States as a resource colony, with a military governor. Back home, Americans watched newsreels showing grateful Canadians welcoming their liberators. The propaganda machine worked overtime, painting the annexation as a rescue mission, bringing democracy and protection to a struggling neighbor. Most citizens believed it, or pretended to. The oil kept flowing, the lights stayed on, and the questions stayed quiet. But Canada wasn't the only neighbor America had its eyes on. The war with China started in 2066, when Chinese forces invaded Alaska. seizing Anchorage and its oil fields in a winter offensive that caught American defenses off guard. For 11 years, the two superpowers tore each other apart across 3 continents. American troops pushed through the Gobi Desert. Chinese submarines hunted convoys in the Pacific. The Yangtze River campaign turned into a meat grinder that consumed entire divisions. Neither side could land a killing blow. Chinese supply lines stretched too far inland for American forces to break. American industrial capacity rebuilt losses faster than China could inflict them. The front lines barely moved. Anchorage was retaken in January 2077 by power armor units, but the victory came too late to matter. Both nations had spent a decade bleeding resources, burning through stockpiles, and radicalizing their populations. The stalemate bred desperation. Conventional warfare wasn't working. Nuclear weapons were too final, too mutual. So military planners on both sides turned to a different arsenal: biological agents that could cripple an enemy population without destroying the infrastructure they wanted to capture. Research programs accelerated, budgets expanded, and ethics committees stopped asking questions. As the war dragged on, both sides developed weapons that made nuclear arsenals look merciful. The new plague hit in 2053, long before the shooting started with China. It spread through water systems, killed 200,000 in the first year, and left survivors with immune systems so damaged they couldn't fight off a common cold. Quarantine zones failed. Hospitals overflowed. The government response was predictable: lock down the coasts, declare martial law, and throw money at a cure. The Pan-Immunity Virion Project launched in 2054 with a simple goal: engineer a virus that would rewrite human DNA to provide immunity to all diseases. Not treatment, not vaccines, permanent biological immunity, hard-coded into the genome. Vault-Tec won the contract. They'd proven themselves on power armor. Now they'd prove themselves on human evolution itself. The project consumed billions in funding and thousands of test subjects, most of them prisoners who never saw a consent form. By 2076, they had something that worked, or seemed to. The Pan-Immunity Virion successfully altered human cells to resist disease. It also altered muscle density, bone structure, and brain chemistry in ways the researchers didn't fully understand. The military saw potential. A soldier immune to biological weapons, stronger, more resilient, easier to deploy in contaminated zones. Testing continued in secret, refining the formula, pushing the limits. The cure they developed would eventually become something far worse than any plague. Vault-Tec wasn't a household name, but by 2076, they held more classified contracts than any other private contractor in the United States. Defense research, biological engineering, experimental weapons development, the kind of work that never made it into quarterly reports. When the government needed a Pan-Immunity Virion, Vault-Tec got the call. The project moved to Mariposa military base in California, a fortified research compound in the middle of nowhere. Officially, they were working on disease resistance. Officially. But the military had different priorities. A soldier who could survive any pathogen was useful. A soldier who was stronger, faster, didn't tire, didn't question orders. That was the goal. The research shifted, quietly, methodically, without oversight. By 2077, the labs at Mariposa were no longer curing anything. They were building something new, rewriting human biology from the ground up, testing the limits of what DNA could become. What they created in those labs would outlive humanity itself. They called it the Forced Evolutionary Virus, FEV, a microscopic rewrite of the human genome, capable of inducing rapid mutations, accelerating evolution by thousands of years in a matter of hours. The Pan-Immunity Project had become something else entirely. Early test subjects showed remarkable changes. increased muscle density, enhanced regeneration, immunity to radiation and disease. But the mutations didn't stop. Subjects grew larger. Their skin thickened and discolored. Cognitive function became unpredictable. Some retained intelligence, others didn't. The military saw potential anyway. A super soldier program that could turn ordinary troops into something indestructible. Deploy them into the most hostile environments on Earth. Win wars that conventional forces couldn't. Testing accelerated. Dosages increased. The results became more extreme. Vault-Tec, meticulous records, documenting every mutation, every failure, every breakthrough. They were building a library of human transformation, a catalog of what the virus could do. While scientists played God in California, another corporation was preparing for the end of everything. Vault-Tec started small, a construction company in the 2050s, specializing in reinforced underground structures. Nothing glamorous, but they had timing, and they had connections. As nuclear anxiety grew, so did their contracts. By 2054, they'd secured their first government shelter project. By 2063, they were the sole contractor for the newly announced Project Safehouse, a nationwide network of nuclear fallout shelters. No competitive bidding, no oversight, just Vault-Tec and unlimited federal funding. Their public pitch was simple: safety for American families, a chance to survive the unthinkable. State-of-the-art bunkers, stocked with everything needed to rebuild civilization. Advertisements ran constantly. Vault-Tec became synonymous with survival, a brand parents trusted with their children's lives. Behind closed doors, they were meeting with military intelligence, shadowy government committees, defense contractors with no names. The real contracts weren't about saving people. They were about data, about experiments, about questions that couldn't be answered in a stable world. The vaults they promised to build were shelters, but not the kind anyone expected. In 2054, Vault-Tec went public. Project Safehouse was announced as the largest civil defense initiative in human history. 122 underground vaults, each designed to house 1,000 people for up to 200 years. The ad campaign was everywhere. Billboards, magazine spreads, radio spots promising a future where nuclear war would be survivable. The lottery system was pure theater. Families applied through local offices, filled out medical questionnaires, paid processing fees. Winners received a vault number and an assignment date. The whole country bought in because the alternative was unthinkable. By 2077, over 400,000 Americans held vault reservations. Most would never make it inside. The vaults had a combined capacity of 122,000, and even that number was a lie. Vault-Tec had no intention of filling them with random lottery winners. Behind the propaganda, Vault-Tec's true purpose was being written in secret meetings that only a few would ever see. The Enclave wasn't a conspiracy theory. It was a shadow government, a network of military brass, corporate executives, and intelligence operatives who'd been planning for the end since the 2050s. They had bunkers, oil rigs, continuity protocols. They had access to everything. Their fingerprints were on every major program: Vault-Tec's FEV research, the annexation of Canada, the construction of orbital weapons platforms. Vault-Tec's contracts came directly from Enclave liaisons, embedded in the Department of Defense. The meetings happened in unmarked buildings outside D.C. No official minutes, no paper trail. Attendees included Vault-Tec executives, military scientists from Vault-Tec, and officials whose names would later be scrubbed from every database. This is where the Vault experiments were truly born. The Enclave gave Vault-Tec a directive in 2063, the Societal Preservation Program. The vaults would be laboratories, each one a controlled environment, testing a single variable, stress conditions that could never be replicated on the surface. Isolation, radiation exposure, leadership structures, genetic diversity, psychological breaking points. The rationale was almost rational. If humanity needed to colonize other worlds or rebuild after total collapse, they'd need data on long-term survival in hostile conditions. Data you couldn't get from volunteers or simulations. Only 17 vaults out of 122 were designated as controls, genuine shelters with no experiments. The rest were sacrifices in the name of a future the Enclave believed only they could secure. Vault-Tec scientists didn't question the ethics. They had unlimited budgets, military protection, and the promise that their work would save the species. Oversight didn't exist. Accountability was a relic of a world that was already dying. With unlimited funding and zero oversight, Vault-Tec began designing experiments that would make the war look humane. Construction began in 2063. Vault-Tec's contract called for 122 vaults across the United States, each one a self-contained underground city rated for 200 years. By 2077, only 113 had been completed. The cost ran into the hundreds of billions, funded through a combination of government contracts, defense budgets, and Vault-Tec's own weapons division profits. Each vault required excavation 200 feet or deeper, reinforced concrete walls 4 feet thick, a fusion reactor capable of running for centuries, water purification systems, hydroponics bays, and living quarters for 500 to 1,000 residents. The engineering was legitimate. The vaults could work. Vault-Tec had the technology to save millions of people. But the societal preservation program demanded more than functional shelters. Experiment vaults received subtle modifications during construction. A door seal designed to fail. A water chip built to malfunction after 10 years. Overseer terminals pre-programmed with instructions that wouldn't be revealed until after the bombs fell. The workers pouring concrete had no idea what they were building. While workers poured concrete and installed reactors, Vault-Tec's societal preservation team was writing protocols that condemned entire communities. 17 vaults were designated as controls. These were the baseline, the vaults that would function exactly as advertised. No experiments, no variables, no hidden agendas, just working shelters that would keep their residents alive and sane for 200 years, then reopen to repopulate America. Vault 8 in Nevada was a control. It worked perfectly, eventually becoming Vault City, one of the most successful post-war settlements. Vault 3 near Vegas was a control. It kept its residents safe for 200 years until raiders broke in decades after opening. Vault 76 in Appalachia, another control, designed to release its dwellers after just 25 years to begin reclamation. The control vaults were crucial to the program's scientific validity. You can't measure the effects of an experiment without a baseline. Vault-Tec needed functional vaults to compare against the disasters they were engineering everywhere else. The Enclave needed data on what normal looked like before they could understand what their variables would produce. The other 96 vaults had different instructions. Vault 12 was built in Bakersfield, California. On paper, it looked identical to every other vault. The same specs, the same layout, the same capacity for 1,000 residents. But the door had a flaw, not an accident, a design feature. The vault door would never fully seal. The purpose was documented in Vault-Tec's classified files. Study the long-term effects of radiation exposure on a human population. While other vaults locked their residents in sterile environments, Vault 12's population would be exposed to continuous low-level radiation through the compromised door. Vault-Tec wanted to know how long humans could survive, what mutations would emerge, whether adaptation was possible. The residents didn't know. They filed into Vault 12 believing they were safe, that the door malfunction was a tragic accident, maybe sabotage, maybe just bad luck. Over months and years, the radiation crept in. Skin lesions appeared first, then hair loss, then the deeper changes. Some died, others transformed into ghouls, their bodies ravaged but functional, their minds intact, their lifespans extended indefinitely by the same radiation that destroyed them. That was one of the gentler experiments. Vault 27 was built for 500 people. Vault-Tec sent 1,000. The overseer knew what was coming. The designers knew what was coming. They'd calculated exactly how long the supplies would last, how quickly desperation would set in, how many days before the first fight over a water ration turned lethal. The experiment was simple. Put twice as many people in a space designed for half, then watch what happened when the food ran out. They projected 4 months before social cohesion collapsed, 6 months before the first acts of cannibalism, 9 months before the vault went silent. Every calorie was accounted for in the original design. Every bed, every oxygen scrubber, every square foot of living space, carefully balanced for 500 residents. The engineers who built it knew the numbers. Vault-Tec's behavioral scientists wanted to see what humans would do when those numbers stopped working. Some vaults were designed to study physical limits. Others targeted the mind. Vault 11 opened with a single rule. Every year, the residents would vote to sacrifice one person. If they refused, the vault's computer would kill everyone. The overseer explained it on day 1. The terminals reinforced it. The entire social structure of the vault built itself around that annual choice. For years, they voted. Factions formed, campaigns ran, deals were made to spare some and condemn others. The sacrifices went into a chamber and never came out. The computer confirmed each death, and life continued for another year. Then 1 year, they refused. 5 people remained, and they decided they'd rather die together than kill again. They waited for the vault to execute them. Instead, a message played. "Congratulations, you have proven yourselves worthy. No one needed to die. The vault could have been opened at any time." Vault-Tec wanted to measure obedience. They wanted to see how long people would kill their neighbors if an authority told them it was necessary. The answer was decades. 4 of the 5 survivors killed each other in the aftermath. While Vault-Tec designed nightmares, the world outside was building toward its own. January 2077. The Battle of Anchorage ended after 11 years. American power armor units pushed the Chinese back across the Bering Strait. The newsreels called it a victory. Tactically, it was. Strategically, both sides had bled themselves to exhaustion. For 3 months, there was a window. Chinese forces were retreating. American supply lines were overstretched. The European Commonwealth had collapsed into infighting. No one had the strength for another major offensive. Diplomats on both sides quietly floated ceasefire terms. But peace required trust, and neither side had any left. America had already annexed Canada and deployed experimental bioweapons. China had launched sabotage operations inside U.S. cities. The fusion technology both nations had fought over for decades remained concentrated in American hands, and China's energy crisis was worse than ever. By summer, the window closed. Troop movements resumed. Early warning systems went to elevated alert. Vault-Tec pushed the final construction teams to finish the last vaults ahead of schedule. In the last months before the bombs, America made one final decision that sealed its fate. On October 10, 2077, Captain Roger Maxson walked into the research wing of Mariposa military base and found something the Army hadn't cleared him to see. Vats of green liquid, prisoners strapped to tables, scientists in hazmat suits logging mutations in human tissue. The forced evolutionary virus experiments had been running for months, and Maxson's security detail had been guarding test subjects without knowing it. He assembled the science team in the lab at gunpoint and demanded answers. When Chief Scientist Robert Anderson admitted the program used military prisoners as involuntary subjects, Maxson executed him on the spot. The rest of the team followed within the hour. Maxon's men seized control of the base, barricaded the gates, and sent a radio transmission to Army Command declaring Mariposa in open rebellion against the United States. High Command didn't respond. For 3 days, Maxon broadcast his secession on military channels, waiting for bombers or a battalion to arrive and end it. Nothing came. The government had larger problems, or no government left to send orders. On October 15th, Maxon stopped waiting. He ordered his soldiers to gather families, pack supplies, and prepare to abandon Mariposa entirely. Maxon's rebellion would save his men from the war and doom them to witness everything that came after. October 22nd, 2077 was a Saturday. In Los Angeles, morning traffic moved through the ruins of the Sino-American War Memorial that nobody had bothered to rebuild. Vault-Tec ran another drill at 11 a.m. The sirens went off. A few families looked up from breakfast, and most ignored it like they'd ignored the last 6 that month. Peace talks in Anchorage had stalled, but the bombs hadn't fallen in 2 years. People stopped sprinting to shelters they didn't believe they'd ever need. In Washington, D.C., the Enclave's final transport lifted off from Adams Air Force Base, carrying the last senators and Joint Chiefs to the Poseidon oil rig. In Boston, a Vault-Tec representative knocked on the door of a house in Sanctuary Hills to confirm the reservation for Vault 111. The family signed the paperwork, relieved to finally have a spot. At Mariposa, Maxon's men welded the FEV lab shut and loaded the last truck. They'd move north at dawn. Across America, 120 million people went to bed that night in a world that had lasted 2,000 years. They set alarms for Sunday morning shifts, left dishes in the sink, and made plans for next weekend. 24 hours later, the world would be ash. At 9:17 a.m. Eastern on October 23rd, NORAD's early warning system lit up. Radar tracked 50, then 200, then over 600 ballistic missile signatures arcing over the pole. The hotline to Beijing rang unanswered. American silos received launch authentication at 9:26. By 9:30, the U.S. had fired its entire strategic arsenal in retaliation. 3,000 warheads were in the air before most Americans knew the war had started. The first strikes hit the coasts at 9:42. Washington, D.C. vaporized in a 15-megaton airburst that turned the Capitol complex into a glass crater. New York, Los Angeles, San Francisco, and Seattle followed within minutes. Each detonation hotter than the surface of the sun. Each shockwave faster than sound. Chinese warheads continued to rain down for the next 2 hours, targeting military bases, industrial centers, and population hubs. American missiles did the same to Beijing, Shanghai, and every major city from the Yangtze to the Gobi. By 11 a.m., the exchange was over. 77 minutes of launches, 2 hours of impacts, and the extinction of most complex life on Earth. Satellites went dark, power grids collapsed, and the sky turned black with ash. The world that woke up that morning ceased to exist before lunch. This is what the world saw from the ground. Washington, D.C. vanished in a flash of light at 9:17 a.m. The Capitol dome vaporized instantly. The White House became a crater 200 feet deep, and everything within 5 miles simply ceased to exist. The thermal pulse ignited fires across the entire metro area, creating a firestorm that consumed what the blast had left standing. Las Vegas lasted 90 seconds longer. The Strip's neon went dark as 3 warheads detonated over the city, turning the desert into glass. Los Angeles burned under a barrage that targeted military installations, the harbor, and downtown, killing 4 million people in the first 10 minutes. Boston's harbor erupted as submarines in port detonated, the shockwave flattening everything to Lexington. New York took 7 direct hits. Manhattan Island sank 40 feet as the bedrock liquefied, the Hudson and East Rivers rushing in to fill a radioactive bay. By 10 a.m. Eastern, 63 American cities had been hit. The death toll in the first hour reached 400 million worldwide. Radiation spread on the wind, an invisible poison that would claim millions more in the days ahead. Those who died in the first hour were the lucky ones. Vault 13 sealed its door at 9:24 a.m. Pacific, 7 minutes after the first detonation. The overseer had run the drills 40 times, and when the sirens wailed, 1,000 residents filed inside in under 6 minutes. Vault 8 in Nevada closed with 30 seconds to spare, leaving 200 people pounding on the outer door as the shockwave rolled across the desert. Vault 12 in Bakersfield never sealed properly. The door mechanism jammed at 65% closure by design. Vault-Tec's deliberate flaw ensuring radiation would seep inside for decades. The residents didn't know. They huddled in the entry chamber, thinking they were safe, as the Geiger counters began to click faster and faster. Some vaults turned away anyone who arrived without a reservation. Vault 101 in D.C. locked out 3,000 desperate survivors, the overseer citing capacity limits, while 200 empty beds sat inside. Vault 111 in Massachusetts admitted only pre-selected military families, soldiers stationed at the door, shooting anyone who tried to force entry. Of 122 vaults, 17 sealed before the bombs fell, 89 closed in time, and 16 never closed at all. Behind those sealed doors, Vault-Tec's real experiment was just beginning. Captain Roger Maxson stood on the roof of Mariposa military base and watched the horizon light up. San Francisco burned 100 miles west, a pillar of fire climbing into the sky. Los Angeles had already gone dark. He'd executed the base commander 4 days earlier for war crimes, declared desertion that morning, and now the world was ending right on schedule. Maxson made the call at 9:30 a.m. 60 soldiers, 23 wives, 14 children, marching south through fallout to a bunker called Lost Hills. They packed weapons, power armor prototypes, every technical manual they could carry, and the knowledge of what they'd found in Mariposa's labs, the FEV experiments that had cost their humanity. The march took 3 days through a landscape that no longer resembled Earth. Radiation counters screamed the entire way. They lost 2 men to exposure, 1 child to the heat. But on October 26th, they reached Lost Hills and sealed themselves inside a pre-war military bunker stocked for a siege. Maxson gathered his people in the command center and made it official. They were no longer U.S. Army. They were the Brotherhood of Steel, and their mission was to keep dangerous technology out of the hands of those who just destroyed the world. The organization they founded in those ruins would shape the wasteland for centuries. While Maxson's troops were deciding their future in the Mariposa ruins, another group was already long gone. The Enclave, the shadow government that had run America from behind the scenes, had spent years preparing for this exact moment. They knew the war was coming because they'd helped engineer the conditions that made it inevitable. On October 22nd, select members of the executive branch, key military commanders, and essential Poseidon Energy personnel evacuated to the Poseidon oil rig, 175 miles off the California coast. The facility had been retrofitted in secret, stocked with supplies, weapons, and enough resources to sustain a self-contained government for decades. President Richardson and his inner circle boarded vertibirds and disappeared into the Pacific, while the rest of the country counted down its final hours. They took the best technology, the most advanced power armor prototypes, and complete records of every Vault experiment Vault-Tec had planned. The continuity of government protocol was always meant to save the government, not the governed. While they fled to safety, they left behind one final card to play. The question that haunts every history in the wasteland: who launched first? The official record, what's left of it, says China fired at 9:13 a.m. Eastern. American detection systems registered the launches. The president gave the retaliation order, and 4 minutes later, the counterstrike was airborne. That's the version most pre-war survivors believed. But some vault records tell a different story. Fragments of Enclave communications suggest American missiles were already in flight when the Chinese launches were detected. And then there's the Vault-Tec theory, the one that keeps researchers awake in bunkers 200 years later. Vault-Tec had everything to lose if the war never came. 122 vaults, billions in investment, experiments that only made sense in a post-nuclear world. Did they have the access? Yes. Vault-Tec contractors had infiltrated every level of the military-industrial complex. Did they have the motive? Every vault was designed to answer questions that required the world to end. Could they have triggered it? The evidence is circumstantial, contradictory, and buried under 200 years of radioactive ash. The truth died with the old world, but the consequences are still playing out. By sunset on October 23rd, the firestorms were still burning. The sky over former cities glowed orange and black, ash falling like snow across both coasts. No power grid, no radio, no satellites overhead. The infrastructure that had connected 400 million people vanished in an afternoon, and the silence was absolute. In the vaults, families sat in their assigned quarters and tried to process what the overseers were telling them. This wasn't temporary. This wasn't a drill they'd walk away from in a week. On the surface, the few who'd survived the initial blasts huddled in basements and subway tunnels, listening to the wind howl through streets that no longer had buildings to block it. Temperatures were already dropping as ash clouds spread across the stratosphere. The first nuclear winter was beginning. Within 48 hours, temps would fall 20 to 30 degrees below normal across the northern hemisphere. Within a week, crops that hadn't burned would start dying in the dark. The world had ended in fire, but it would spend the next months freezing. When dawn came, the survivors faced a world nothing had prepared them for. Radiation didn't care about shelter or luck. Fallout rained down for days, a poisonous ash that contaminated every water source, every breath. The ones caught in the open died within hours, their cells ripping apart from the inside. The ones in basements or partially shielded buildings bought themselves a few more days. Radiation sickness worked in stages. First came the nausea and vomiting, then the burns that wouldn't heal. Hair fell out in clumps, skin peeled away in sheets. By the end of week 1, the screaming had mostly stopped. Water was the cruel joke. Every lake, every river, every well glowed faintly at night from cesium-137 and strontium-90. Drink it, and you'd be dead in a week. Don't drink it, and you'd be dead in 3 days. The math was simple and merciless. Temperatures had already dropped 15 degrees Fahrenheit by October 30th. The ash clouds choked out what little sunlight remained, turning noon into twilight. Bodies stacked up faster than anyone could bury them, and soon nobody tried. The ones who survived that first week faced an even harder question. What now? The ash didn't settle. It hung in the atmosphere, circling the globe on jet streams, blocking 70% of sunlight within 2 weeks. Surface temperatures plummeted to winter levels even in equatorial zones. Photosynthesis stopped. The ecological collapse cascaded faster than anyone predicted. Plants died first, then the herbivores, then the predators. Oceans acidified from the ash falling as toxic rain. Algae blooms choked out marine life. The food chain disintegrated from bottom to top in 6 months. By January 2078, global temperatures had dropped 40 degrees Fahrenheit below pre-war averages. Crops that survived the blasts froze in the fields. Livestock starved when feed ran out. Survivors ate bark, leather, anything with calories. Then they ate each other. The radiation killed millions. The cold killed tens of millions. But starvation killed hundreds of millions. A slow arithmetic of dwindling supplies and endless winter. The war itself lasted 2 hours. Nuclear winter lasted 5 years. In the vaults below, residents had no idea their shelter might become their tomb. Vault 13, sealed at 9:47 a.m. on October 23, 2077, exactly 30 minutes after the first warhead detonated over Las Vegas. The massive gear door ground shut with 1,000 residents inside, families who'd bought their spots or won the lottery or worked for the right company. One of the lucky vaults. It was a control vault. Classified documentation later revealed. No experiments. No hidden variables. Vault-Tec designed it to seal for 25 years and open on schedule in 2102. A baseline to measure the twisted experiments running in the others. For those first weeks, everything worked perfectly. The residents settled into routines. Hydroponics hummed. Water recyclers processed 500 gallons daily. The overseer ran drills and maintained order. Children attended classes. People married, had families, built lives underground. Nobody questioned the machinery keeping them alive. Then in 2161, 84 years into a 25-year experiment, the primary water chip failed. A microprocessor flaw Vault-Tec engineers never caught, corroding slowly in the moisture. Reserves would last 150 days, maybe less. The overseer faced an impossible choice: stay and die of thirst, or crack the door and face whatever remained outside. A broken water chip would eventually force them back into the wasteland and create a legend. Not everyone exposed to the initial blast died. Some absorbed 800, 1,000, even 1,200 rads and kept breathing. Their skin blackened and peeled. Hair fell out in clumps. Flesh turned leathery, then worse. The process took days. Genetic anomalies. Trace FEV in the water table. Sheer dumb luck. Something kept their cells repairing just fast enough to outpace the rot. By the end of the first week, witnesses reported figures shambling through the ruins that didn't look human anymore. Survivors in the rubble saw them and panicked. Ghouls, they called them. Monsters. Shoot on sight became the rule in most camps. It didn't matter that they could still talk, still think. The transformation had marked them as something else, something to fear. A ghoul named Eddie in the Bakersfield ruins wrote 11 pages in a scorched notebook before a scavenger gang found him. The last entry, "Still me inside." They won't believe that. Ghouls weren't the only new species the radiation was creating. Rad scorpions appeared first. Normal desert bark scorpions exposed to fallout, swelling to the size of dogs within weeks. Venom sacs tripled in volume. A single sting could drop an adult in under 30 seconds. Giant ants followed. Colonies near irradiated sugar refineries mutated faster, workers growing to 5 feet long. Their mandibles could shear through sheet metal. Nests spread through the subway systems, turning underground into a death sentence. Then came the death claws. Mariposa's FEV samples had vaporized in the blast, contaminating a 40-mile radius. Jackson's chameleons, caught in the cloud, underwent catastrophic mutation. Bipedal, 9 feet tall, claws like machetes. Intelligence tests later suggested near-human problem-solving. Brahmin, 2-headed cattle, proved one of the few useful mutations. Hardier than their pre-war cousins, they could digest irradiated vegetation and still produce milk. Every other change in the animal kingdom tilted toward predator. The new ecosystem was adapting faster than humanity could. Families huddled in basement shelters, storm cellars, anywhere with concrete between them and the sky. They rationed canned beans and kept weapons by the door. The first rule, never go out alone. The second, never go out at night. Clean water became currency. Survivors boiled runoff through charcoal filters, prayed the Geiger counter stayed below 5 rads per liter. A working pump could sustain 30 people. A broken one meant migration. or death. Most settlements formed within a day's walk of a water source that hadn't turned too hot. They scavenged in shifts, canned food, ammunition, medical supplies, anything sealed before the war. A box of antibiotic powder could trade for a week's worth of rations. Knowledge became survival. Who knew how to set a bone, purify water, reload spent casings? By spring of 2078, rough communities were coalescing. 50 people here, 80 there, walls of rubble and sheet metal, lookouts with hunting rifles. They learned the rhythms of the new world, what times the rad scorpions hunted, where the ash storms blew in from. Some of them found shelter in places that should have protected them, but didn't. 14 years after the bombs fell, Vault 8's overseer checked the timer, confirmed the all-clear from the radiation sensors, and opened the door. The residents walked out into sunlight, carrying prefab building kits, water purification chips, and a GECK that actually worked. Within 6 months, they'd erected walls, laid irrigation lines, and renamed themselves Vault City. This was the plan. This was how it was supposed to go. A control vault, no experiment, just 1,000 people waiting out the worst of it and rebuilding with functioning tech. They had laws, elections, and a medical bay that could synthesize antibiotics. By 2096, they were already enforcing citizenship requirements and looking down on wastelanders who hadn't spent the last decade in climate-controlled safety. Most vaults wouldn't wait that long, and most wouldn't open voluntarily. Vault 15 was designed to fracture. Vault-Tec filled it with every ideology they could draft. Radical environmentalists next to doomsday preppers. Religious zealots bunked with anarcho-syndicalists. All of them sealed in together, with no overseer protocol strong enough to hold it. The door was supposed to open in 2097, but by 2087, the vault had already split into armed factions, fighting over the water chip and the meaning of the war. When they finally broke the seal in 2097, 4 groups walked out and immediately went separate directions. The Khans headed north, taking the belief that strength and raid tactics were the only laws that mattered. The Vipers went southwest, twisted their survivalism into a cult, started worshipping serpents and taking slaves. The Jackals scattered into the Mojave as roving cannibals, and one group, the smallest, carried farming equipment toward a settlement they'd name Shady Sands. One of those tribes would eventually become the most powerful nation in the wasteland. In 2102, a man named Richard Gray descended into Mariposa military base looking for pre-war tech. His rope snapped. He fell 4 stories into a vat of FEV that the bombs had somehow left intact, still active, still mutating anything with a genome. He didn't die. The virus didn't let him. For months, he screamed in that vat, his cells rewriting themselves, his body pulling in rats and debris and integrating them, neurons multiplying until his mind could hold more than one thought stream at once. By the time he dragged himself out, he wasn't Richard Gray anymore. He was a distributed consciousness, fused with the base itself, telepathic, immortal, and capable of logic no human brain could process in a single thread. He spent the next 10 years thinking. He saw the wasteland through stolen memories, saw the mutations, the cancers, the stillbirths. He calculated trajectories. Humanity would be extinct in 3 generations unless something changed at the genetic level. FEV could do that. FEV had done it to him. What he became convinced him that humanity's only salvation was to stop being human. He called it the Unity. Every human transformed into a super mutant through controlled FEV exposure. No more disease, no more aging, no more tribal warfare over irradiated water. Just one species, immortal and strong, finally capable of surviving what the bombs had left behind. The Master set up operations in a pre-war military base called Mariposa, and later the cathedral in the Boneyard. he began dipping captured wastelanders into FEV vats, building his army one screaming conversion at a time. Most died. The ones who survived became 7-foot-tall super mutants, their minds wiped clean or shattered by the transformation. By 2102, he had dozens. By 2120, he had hundreds, organized into war parties that dragged more subjects back to the vats. The Master refined his process, studied the mutations, and planned his campaign to unite the wasteland under one green fist. For 40 years, his army would grow in the dark, until one vault dweller emerged to stop him. On the same day the bombs fell, Captain Roger Maxson declared his garrison's independence from the U.S. Army. By 2077, with the government ash and his men the only organized force left in the Mariposa region, he formalized what they'd become, the Brotherhood of Steel, named for the technology they swore to protect and the bunker that kept them alive. Maxson's doctrine was simple: preserve pre-war knowledge, safeguard weapons of mass destruction, and never let the wastelanders repeat the mistakes that ended civilization. The Brotherhood adopted a strict hierarchy modeled on medieval knighthood: scribes to study technology, knights to wield it, paladins to lead. Outsiders were not trusted with power armor or energy weapons. They moved into the Lost Hills bunker in Southern California and sealed the blast doors. For decades, they'd patrol the wasteland in small squads, recovering laser rifles and fusion cores, then vanish back underground. No alliances, no nation building, no sharing. While they hoarded technology, the wasteland was rebuilding without them. In 2142, a group of Vault-15 refugees stopped running. They'd been driven out by internal conflict, wandering the Mojave for weeks with nothing but Brahmin and seed packets. They found a spot with soil that wasn't completely dead, dug irrigation ditches from a nearby aquifer, and planted the first crops anyone had grown in 65 years. They called it Shady Sands. Within 5 years, it had 50 permanent residents, mud brick homes, and a functioning council. By 2161, the population hit 200. They grew maize, cabbage, and mut fruit under makeshift sunshades, trading surplus food to caravans for tools and ammunition. Raiders tested them twice. Both times, Shady Sands militia drove them off. It wasn't grand. The walls were sheet metal and sandbags. The Brahmin pens stank, and every harvest was a gamble against radstorms and locusts. But it worked. People were eating. Children were being born. And for the first time since the war, a community was growing instead of just surviving. That small farming town would eventually become the new California Republic, but not for decades yet. While Shady Sands was learning to farm, another settlement was emerging 200 miles south. The hub grew around one of the few intact water wells in Southern California, a resource valuable enough to attract survivors from dozens of scattered camps. By 2120, it wasn't just a town, it was the wasteland's first real trading post. Caravans began running regular routes between the hub and settlements like Shady Sands, Junktown, and the Boneyard. Brahmin-pulled carts carried water, scrap metal, and salvaged pre-war goods. Merchants established trade houses. A merchant class emerged, families who controlled the caravan routes and the flow of caps. The hub's water merchants became powerful, not through force, but through monopoly. If you wanted clean water for your settlement, you negotiated with them. If you wanted to trade across the wasteland, you paid their fees. The hub had no formal government, just a council of merchant barons who controlled access to the one thing everyone needed. Commerce was returning, and so were the old power structures that came with it. Back in Bakersfield, the residents of Vault 12 were still alive. Barely. The vault door had never sealed properly, exactly as Vault-Tec designed it. Radiation poured in for decades, slow and relentless, warping their bodies cell by cell. By 2083, the transformation was complete. Everyone in Vault 12 was a ghoul. They tried to leave, to find help, to understand what had happened to them. But the wasteland didn't welcome them. Smooth-skinned settlers saw rotting flesh and assumed monsters. Some ghouls were shot on sight, others were driven off with torches. So they returned to their vault and renamed it Necropolis, City of the Dead. The ghouls of Necropolis built a society in the ruins. They learned they didn't age, didn't need much food or water, could survive radiation that would kill anyone else. A ghoul named Set took control of the surface ruins, while another group, led by a glowing one, remained underground in the vault itself. They endured, isolated and bitter. Their city would become a symbol of Vault-Tec's cruelty and ghoul resilience. On December 5th, 261, 84 years after the war, the overseer of Vault 13 made a decision that would change everything. The vault's water purification chip had failed. Without a replacement, everyone inside would die of thirst in 150 days. So he chose one person, a young vault dweller, and sent them to the surface with a single mission: find a replacement chip. The vault dweller emerged into a world they'd only read about in vault textbooks. Shady Sands was a thriving town now. The hub's caravans ran on schedule. Junktown had laws. The wasteland had endured, adapted, rebuilt. It wasn't the world their grandparents had fled, and it wasn't the paradise Vault-Tec promised. It was something in between. They found clues in Necropolis, rumors in the hub, coordinates from a dying caravan guard. The water chip trail led west, then south, toward locations marked only on pre-war maps. They recruited companions, fought raiders, learned to survive, and slowly, they uncovered something far worse than a broken water chip. He was searching for a water chip. What he found was the Master. The super mutants weren't raiders. They were organized, coordinated, and growing in number. Patrols moved with military precision. Captured wastelanders disappeared into Mariposa and never came out human. The Master called it the Unity. One mind, one purpose, one perfect species. FEV transformed humans into super mutants in vats deep inside the old military base, each dipping adding another soldier to an army that felt no fear, no doubt, no division. By 2161, mutant war parties ranged across the wasteland, from the hub to Necropolis. They took prisoners, not supplies. Every caravan they hit, every settlement they raided, fed the dipping chambers. The operation ran 24 hours a day. Vault 13 had sent one man with a pistol and a canteen. The Master had been building his army for 60 years. The Vault Dweller had months to stop him. Mariposa's lowest levels still hummed with pre-war power. The Vault Dweller descended past mutant barracks, past armories stocked with miniguns and rocket launchers, into the facility's core. The FEV vats waited in rows, each one large enough to hold a human body. Prisoners hung in restraints above the green liquid, waiting their turn. The process took seconds. Skin split, bones lengthened, muscle mass tripled. What climbed out wasn't human anymore. Some retained intelligence, most didn't. The Master didn't seem to care about the ratio. Security logs showed the scale: 200 dippings in the last year, 400 the year before. Exponential growth as each new mutant brought back more prisoners. The lieutenant ran the operation with industrial efficiency, filling quotas the Master set from the cathedral. The Vault Dweller planted explosives in the vat control room and the reactor. Mariposa's destruction would cripple production, buy time, save hundreds from the dipping chambers. Destroying the facility wouldn't be enough. He had to confront the Master himself. The Cathedral of the Lost stood in the Boneyard's ruins, a pre-war building converted into the wasteland's fastest-growing religion. Missionaries preached unity and salvation. Pilgrims traveled hundreds of miles to join. The Nightkin guarded the lower levels, where no convert ever went. Beneath the sanctuary, Past the true believers and the armed escorts, the Vault Dweller found the master. Richard Gray had been human once, before Mariposa, before FEV exposure fused him with computers and other living tissue. Now he was something else, a biomechanical intelligence networked into the cathedral itself, orchestrating the unity from a throne of flesh and circuitry. The master spoke of ending war, ending suffering, evolving humanity into something that couldn't destroy itself. His vision was almost beautiful. Then the Vault Dweller showed him the data from Mariposa's terminals, the reproductive studies the lieutenant had buried, the failure rate in FEV subjects. Supermutants were sterile, every single one. The Unity couldn't reproduce, couldn't sustain itself, couldn't evolve. It could only convert or die. 60 years of work, thousands of dippings, an army built to save humanity by replacing it, and the species it created had no future. What the Vault Dweller showed the master would end the Unity forever. The data was clear. Every super mutant the master had ever created, every specimen he'd tested, showed the same result: sterile, all of them. FEV didn't just transform human DNA. It shredded the delicate architecture of reproductive cells beyond repair. The Unity could sweep across the wasteland, convert every human settlement, from shady sands to the hub, and in 80 years, there'd be nothing left but empty vaults and ruins. The master had built a future that couldn't outlive its architect. On February 19, 262, in the cathedral beneath Los Angeles, he triggered the nuclear warhead at the base's heart. The explosion vaporized 60 years of research, the mutation vats, and the master himself. The Vault Dweller had saved the wasteland, but Vault 13 wouldn't let him come home. The Overseer met him at the vault door on March 3, 262. Vault 13 was safe. The water chip was installed. The mutant threat was over, and the Vault Dweller had 24 hours to leave. The Overseer had watched him change, watched him learn to survive in the wasteland, to kill, to negotiate with raiders and merchants and mutants. That kind of experience couldn't be contained. He'd inspire others to leave, to question, to want more than vault life offered. So the man who'd saved them was handed a canteen and a rifle and pointed into the desert. He walked north through the ruins of California, alone, until he found others like him. Wastelanders, vault deserters, tribal refugees, people building something new. His exile would create the next generation's hero and their greatest threat. In 2167, 5 years after his exile, the Vault Dweller founded Arroyo in the Oregon Hills. The settlement blended vault discipline with wasteland pragmatism. They grew maize and gourds, kept Brahmin, trained hunters, and wrote their history on cave walls. The village elder taught them Vault 13's old principles: self-reliance, community governance, careful resource management. But Arroyo never sealed itself away. They traded with caravans, married wastelanders, adapted. By 2208, Arroyo had grown into a thriving tribal community of nearly 200. Then the Vault Dweller walked into the wasteland one morning and never returned. Some say he went searching for Vault 13. Others say he just kept walking. Decades later, his grandchild would be forced to retrace his steps. While the new California Republic grew from shady sands and the wasteland slowly rebuilt, something stirred on the Pacific coast. The Enclave, the shadow government that had triggered the Great War, had survived on an oil rig off the coast of San Francisco. For 160 years they'd waited, insulated and pure, watching the mainland through iBots and radio chatter. By the 2220s, they were ready to reclaim America. Their technology had leapfrogged anything the Brotherhood possessed: vertibirds, advanced power armor, energy weapons that made plasma rifles look primitive. But their ideology had curdled into something monstrous. To the Enclave, every wastelander was a mutant, genetically compromised by radiation. Humanity, they believed, existed only on the rig. In 2236, Enclave soldiers in black power armor descended on Mariposa. They excavated the ruined military base, searching through collapsed levels and flooded chambers. What they wanted was buried deep, samples of the forced evolutionary virus, the master's tool for creating supermutants. The FEV was the key to a modified strain, one the Enclave scientists had been refining for years. They had a plan to purge the wasteland, and they needed the master's work to do it. On May 16, 2242, vertibirds dropped over Vault 13. Enclave shock troops breached the vault door in minutes, their armor shrugging off security fire. The dwellers, descendants of the Vault Dwellers' old community, were rounded up at gunpoint and loaded into transport cages. No one told them where they were going. No one told them why. They were flown to the oil rig and taken to the labs. The Enclave needed test subjects for their modified FEV, human baselines, untouched by wasteland radiation. Vault 13's isolation made them perfect. Over months, the scientists injected, observed, and recorded. Most subjects died. Some transformed into twisted, malformed creatures. The data fed into the bioweapon they were engineering, a virus that would recognize mutated DNA and kill on contact. One experiment succeeded beyond expectation. A Secret Service agent named Frank Horrigan, already massive, was dipped in FEV after a near-fatal injury. He grew to 12 feet, his strength and aggression amplified to terrifying levels. The Enclave sealed him in custom power armor and gave him a rank, their enforcer, their symbol of America reborn. The irony was lost on them. They preached genetic purity while deploying a super mutant as their champion. One villager escaped the raid and carried a desperate mission. Arroyo was dying. The village the Vault Dweller had founded in Oregon was withering under drought, crops failing, clean water running out. In 2241, the elder sent her grandchild, the youngest and strongest of the tribe, into the wasteland with a single objective: find a GECK, the Garden of Eden creation kit, a pre-war terraforming device that could restore the land. Vault City had one. Vault 13 supposedly had another. The journey would be long, and the wastes were cruel. The Chosen One, as the tribe called them, started south through the ruins of California. They hit Klamath first, a trapper town reeking of gecko hides. Then the Den, a slave-trading pit of chem dealers and raiders. New Reno came next, a city run by crime families, straight out of old-world mobster hollows. Every stop revealed a wasteland, more complex than Arroyo's oral histories had described. The NCR had laws, taxes, and ambitions. Vault City had turned isolationist and cruel. Broken Hills tried to make peace between humans, ghouls, and mutants. Then the trail led to Vault 13. The door was open, the halls empty except for Deathclaws, intelligent ones who spoke and farmed. They'd taken over after the Enclave's raid. Refugees themselves. The overseer's records revealed the kidnapping, the oil rig, and fragments of a plan, coded in technical jargon. The Enclave wasn't just a ghost story. They were active, armed, and working on something catastrophic. The GECK he sought would lead him to a conspiracy that threatened the entire wasteland. While the Chosen One traveled north, the new California Republic had already rewritten what civilization meant in the wasteland. Shady Sands, the settlement Tandy helped build in 2161, had grown into something the old world would recognize: a constitutional democracy with elected presidents, a standing army, and tax collectors. By 2241, the NCR controlled trade routes from the hub to Vault City, fielded over 700 soldiers, and minted its own currency backed by gold reserves. They built schools, courts, and a functioning postal service. They outlawed slavery and wrote laws protecting Brahmin herds. Their flag, a two-headed bear copied from the pre-war California Republic, flew over farms that actually grew enough food to feed towns. But expansion brought the problems the Old World never solved: land grabs, corruption, bureaucratic bloat. Some NCR soldiers acted like peacekeepers, others acted like conquerors. But the Brahmin barons held more influence than most elected officials. Settlements that joined the Republic found their resources taxed to fund distant campaigns. The ideal was real, the execution flawed. The NCR represented hope for order, but order isn't always justice. 300 miles northeast, New Reno offered a different answer to what civilization could become. No elections, no constitution, just 4 crime families carving up a pre-war city that never quite died. The Wrights ran guns. The Mordinos pushed jet, a drug so addictive it enslaved entire towns. The bishops controlled prostitution and the casinos. The Salvatores had energy weapons no one else could match. Violence kept the balance. The families fought over territory, with car bombs and sniper nests, but they never let it burn the whole city down, because the casinos needed customers, and the drug labs needed workers. New Reno had electricity, running water in some districts, and a thriving economy built on vices the NCR tried to legislate away. It was ugly, brutal, and it worked. Travelers could get rich or get killed, sometimes both in the same night. The city proved you didn't need laws or flags to rebuild, just ruthless pragmatism and an understanding that chaos has its own stability. The chosen one would pass through these competing visions on his way to the Enclave's doorstep. Navarro sat on the coast south of San Francisco, a refueling depot the Enclave turned into their mainland fortress. Vertibirds landed there, patrols staged from there. The chosen one walked in, wearing stolen power armor, bluffing his way past sentries who thought he was just another soldier, rotating back from the oil rig. Inside, he found the truth the Enclave had been engineering since 2236. An airborne variant of FEV, redesigned to target anyone with even trace radiation exposure, which meant everyone. Every wastelander, every vault dweller who'd stepped outside, every mutant and ghoul. The Enclave's geneticists had refined it to spread through the jet stream, a single release that would sterilize the continent within weeks. They called it the final solution to restoring America. Mass extinction dressed up as patriotism. The chosen one copied files, stole security codes, and walked out with a suit of Enclave power armor that would get him onto the oil rig. The base's commander never suspected the tribal in Mark II armor was counting their vertibirds and memorizing patrol schedules. The Enclave had spent decades perfecting genocide. The chosen one had days to stop them. The oil rig sat 175 miles off the California coast, a pre-war fortress the Enclave had turned into their seat of government. The chosen one arrived on October 23, 2242, exactly 165 years after the bombs fell. President Dick Richardson believed his plan was flawless. Release a modified FEV strain into the jet stream, kill every mutated organism on the surface, and repopulate with pure vault stock. He didn't consider that the tribal standing in his office had already planted explosives in the reactor level. Frank Horrigan blocked the evacuation corridor, 12 feet of power armor and genetically enhanced muscle. The Enclave's greatest weapon had been dipped in FEV, surgically augmented and psychologically conditioned for one purpose. The fight lasted 7 minutes. When the reactor went critical, Horrigan was still standing, firing into the smoke as the rig began to sink. The explosion was visible from the coast. 1,076 Enclave personnel died in the initial detonation. Another 340 drowned or burned in the oil-slicked water. The presidential line of succession ended at the bottom of the Pacific. Destroying the oil rig wouldn't destroy the Enclave, but it would break them for a generation. Vault 13's residents walked out of Enclave captivity on October 25th, blinking in sunlight most had never seen. The Chosen One handed the GECK to Arroyo's survivors and left before they could make him elder. Within 18 months, the device had transformed 240 square miles of wasteland into arable land, exactly as advertised. The NCR moved into the vacuum fast. Redding's gold mines became state property by March 2243. Vault City signed annexation terms by 2244, trading sovereignty for infrastructure investment. New Reno's families learned to pay taxes or face rangers with shoot-on-sight warrants. What the Enclave had tried to take by genocide, the Republic absorbed through bureaucracy and superior logistics. By 2246, the NCR's eastern border reached the Colorado River, and its population topped 700,000. Merchants traveled routes the Brotherhood patrolled. Traders used NCR dollars in 6 states, and caravans moved under the protection of a government that could actually govern. The wasteland had become something else. Fru Fausti, 2 heroes, had now saved the wasteland from extinction, but the war's legacy was far from over. Washington, D.C. never stopped burning. The Pentagon took 5 direct hits on October 23, 2077. The Capitol building melted into its foundation. By 2277, radiation levels in the city center still measured 3,200 rads per hour, lethal exposure in under 90 seconds. The Potomac River glowed green at night. The Capitol wasteland earned its name honestly. Where California had agriculture within a generation, D.C. had feral ghouls and super mutants that bred in the metro tunnels. Settlements clung to highway overpasses and bombed-out suburbs. Clean water didn't exist. Food came from 200-year-old packages or 2-headed Brahmin, and most people died before 40. Vault-Tec had built Vault 101 in the northwest suburbs with one experiment in mind: never open, never leave. Observe a closed society across generations. The overseer's family maintained the seal through 7 generations and 200 years of absolute isolation. No trade, no contact, no exceptions. The vault door weighed 20 tons and hadn't moved since 2077. Vault 101 had stayed sealed for 200 years until one resident broke the greatest rule of all. James escaped through the vault door in the middle of the night, leaving his child behind with nothing but questions. The overseer sealed the entrance immediately, but the damage was done. For the first time in 2 centuries, Vault 101's residents knew the outside existed, and someone had reached it. The vault's experiment wasn't about radiation shielding or social structure. Vault-Tec designed 101 to never open, testing how a population would handle permanent isolation under a single family's control. The overseer's bloodline held absolute authority, passing the role from parent to child, generation after generation. Dissent meant reassignment to maintenance. Questioning the rules meant reconditioning. When security turned the vault inside out, hunting for James, his 19-year-old child realized staying meant imprisonment, or worse. The overseer's daughter provided the code to the door controls. On August 17, 2277, the tunnel entrance groaned open for the second time in 3 days, flooding the cave with daylight. The father he chased into the wasteland had a secret that would determine the Capitol's future. James wasn't running from Vault 101. He was running toward unfinished work. Before the vault, before his child was born, he'd been a scientist with the Rivet City community. His obsession was the Jefferson Memorial, the pre-war water treatment facility on the Potomac that once supplied 240,000 gallons per day to downtown D.C. Project Purity aimed to resurrect the memorial's filtration systems and scrub 200 years of radiation from the river itself. Clean water pumped directly into the Potomac Basin free for every settlement, from Megaton to Rivet City. No more two-headed Brahmin, no more depending on caravans, no more children born with tumors because their mother drank from a puddle. The team came close in 2258. They cleared the memorial's main chamber, restored partial power, mapped the intake pipes. Then raiders hit the site during a supply run. James's wife Catherine died in the attack, 8 months pregnant. The project collapsed. James fled to Vault 101 with his newborn, sealed himself away, and tried to forget. But 19 years in a tomb doesn't erase what you were trying to build. Restarting the project would require something the wasteland didn't have: a GECK. The capital wasteland hit different than the Mojave or California. No New Vegas lights, no NCR patrols, no structure at all. DC was rubble and feral ghouls, and super mutants pouring out of Vault 87 every night. Settlements were 8 people behind sheet metal. Trade routes were shoot on sight. The Brotherhood of Steel controlled the Pentagon, and basically nothing else. Tracking James took weeks. Megaton's residents pointed toward Galaxy News Radio. GNR sent the trail to Rivet City. Rivet City's doctor, James's old colleague, finally admitted the truth. Project Purity was running again. James had returned to the memorial with a few scientists and Elder Lyons' protection. They were 60% toward a functioning purifier when Enclave vertibirds appeared over the Potomac. The same Enclave that died on the oil rig. The same power armor, the same energy weapons, but organized now, disciplined. Colonel Autumn walked into the memorial's control room with a full squad and demanded the activation codes. James flooded the chamber with radiation rather than hand them over. He died at the console. His child, who'd arrived 90 seconds too late, watched through 6 inches of leaded glass as their father collapsed. But the Enclave had learned from their oil rig failure, and this time they brought something far worse. Liberty Prime had been sitting in the Citadel's courtyard for 200 years, a 40-foot-tall relic of a war that never happened. The robot was built to storm Anchorage, to march through Chinese lines bellowing Cold War slogans, while its eye laser vaporized everything in its path. The Brotherhood scribes had spent months getting it operational, replacing power systems, and teaching pre-war code to interface with Enclave frequencies. When they finally activated it in 2277, Liberty Prime walked straight through the Enclave's front line at the Jefferson Memorial. Its tactical assessment protocols identified power-armored fascists as communist threats, which was close enough for government work. Democracy is non-negotiable, it announced, hurling nuclear footballs at vertibirds. The Enclave's plasma weapons barely scorched its armor plating. Their Deathclaw squads couldn't climb fast enough. In 11 minutes, Liberty Prime cleared a path to the rotunda, and the lone wanderer walked through the rubble to finish what their father started. The Enclave fell, but out west, something older was stirring in the Mojave Desert. New Vegas shouldn't exist. 77 atomic warheads fell on Nevada on October 23, 2077, turning most of the state into glowing craters and radioactive glass. But the Strip's neon still burned, its casinos still stood, because Robert House had done the math 20 years earlier and decided he wasn't going to die. He'd upgraded Robco's mainframe into a citywide defense network, stationed laser arrays on every rooftop, and written targeting algorithms that could track incoming missiles at Mach 14. When the bombs came, his system shot down 68 of the 77 warheads aimed at Vegas. The 9 that got through hit the outskirts. The Lucky 38 casino didn't lose power for a single second. House spent the next 204 years in a hibernation pod, running probability models and waiting for civilization to rebuild enough that he could restart his empire. He sent his Securitron army into the ruins, cleared out the tribals, and rebuilt 3 casinos as a proof of concept. The city became a beacon, drawing scavengers and armies and fortune seekers from across the wasteland. And in 2281, A courier carrying a platinum chip would learn exactly what that price was. The courier was hauling a poker chip from Prim to the New Vegas Strip when Benny and his cons caught up to them in Good Springs Cemetery. Benny wore a checkered suit and carried a pistol called Maria. He shot the courier twice in the head, took the platinum chip from their bag, and left them in a shallow grave. A Securitron dug them up 6 hours later. Doc Mitchell pulled the bullets out and patched the brain damage well enough that the courier could walk. They woke up with amnesia, a nasty scar, and a delivery contract they intended to fulfill even if the client was already dead. What they didn't know was that the chip contained security upgrades for House's entire Securitron army, code that would turn 2,000 obsolete robots into a military force capable of holding the Hoover Dam against both the NCR and Caesar's Legion. Benny wanted it to take Vegas for himself. House needed it to secure his independence. The NCR and the Legion both wanted House dead and the dam under their control. The chip contained the key to an army that had waited 200 years to wake up. October 22, 81. The NCR's 1st Recon sharpshooters dug in on the east side of the dam, while Caesar's Frumentari infiltrated Camp McCarran, 3 miles south. Mr. House locked down the Lucky 38 and waited. Each faction knew the courier held the platinum chip, the only thing standing between them and total control of the Mojave's 4.2 terawatt hydroelectric grid. The NCR brought 1,000 troopers, 6 vertibirds, and the weight of a republic that stretched from Baja to Oregon. Caesar brought the Praetorian Guard, 87 tribes unified under the bull, and a tumor that was killing him faster than any NCR sniper could. House brought an army of Securitrons that hadn't moved in 200 years, and a calculation that gave him 86% odds of victory if the chip reached its destination. The Second Battle of Hoover Dam wasn't about territory. It was about which vision of civilization deserved to inherit what was left of the American dream. One courier, one chip, one dam that powered 8 settlements and kept the lights on in a world that had been dark for 2 centuries. But while the West fought over dams, the Commonwealth was drowning in something far stranger. Beneath the ruins of the Commonwealth Institute of Technology, 200 feet below the irradiated surface of Boston, the institute had been operational since 2110. The best minds that survived the Great War sealed themselves underground and kept working. While the surface tore itself apart over canned food and clean water, they perfected synthetic biology, advanced robotics, and a vision of humanity's future that didn't include anyone who'd been exposed to 200 years of radiation. By 2227, they'd cracked it. Generation 3 synths, synthetic humans, indistinguishable from the real thing, down to the cellular level. They walked, talked, bled, and died exactly like the people they were designed to replace. The Institute called them mankind redefined. Everyone on the surface called them an abomination that murdered your neighbor and wore their face. The Institute didn't see it that way. They saw a Commonwealth too damaged, too violent, too contaminated to save. So they built their own people, clean and controllable, and sent them topside to observe, to infiltrate, to prepare the surface for a future only they understood. The Commonwealth had no idea what lived beneath their feet. No idea that the scientists who'd survived the bombs had decided 200 years ago that wastelanders weren't worth saving, and they'd been replacing people on the surface for decades before anyone noticed. Vault 111 was a cryogenic experiment. 111 residents, frozen on October 23, 2077, the day the bombs fell, with no scheduled wake date. Vault-Tec wanted to see how long a human could be kept in suspended animation. The Institute wanted something else. On October 23, 2227, exactly 150 years after the war, they opened Vault 111, shot a parent in front of their spouse, and took an infant named Sean for reasons the frozen survivor wouldn't understand for another 60 years. The cryopod malfunctioned, or maybe it didn't. Either way, the sole survivor of Vault 111 thawed on October 23, 2287, exactly 210 years after their child was stolen. Sean was 60 years old. He was also father, director of the Institute, the man who'd spent 6 decades turning his own kidnapping into the foundation of synthetic biology. The Institute had raised him, trained him, and gave him control of the most advanced technology in the Commonwealth. The survivors stepped into a wasteland that had moved on without them. Their spouse was dead. Their child had grown old in a lab beneath MIT, building synths from his own DNA and sending them topside to replace the people who might have been his neighbors. The Institute called it progress. The sole survivor called it the day their family ended, and the Great War finally came home. This is where the Great War's legacy becomes truly personal. Nate or Nora, depending on who you'd been before the freeze, woke 210 years late to a world that made no sense. Their spouse was dead. Their infant son Sean was gone, taken by a man in a hazmat suit and a woman who called the kidnapping compensation for losses incurred. The Institute had murdered one parent and stolen the child, then put the survivor back on ice, like a lab specimen they might need later. So the sole survivor did what any parent would do. They tore through the Commonwealth looking for answers, following a trail that led through Diamond City, Good Neighbor, the Glowing Sea. Every lead pointed to the Institute. Every question about Sean hit a wall of silence or a synth ambush. No one knew how to find the place. No one even knew where it was. Turns out, the Institute had been replacing people with synth duplicates for years. The mayor of Diamond City, a caravan merchant, a random farmer in a settlement you'd helped defend. You'd never know until you found the body, or the synth component after you put them down. The technology that had stolen their son was being used to infiltrate, replace, and control every corner of what passed for civilization in the Commonwealth. When the sole survivor finally made it inside, teleported into a facility that looked like it had been pulled from before the war, they found Sean, 60 years old, dying of cancer. Father, the leader of the Institute. The child they'd been hunting had grown up, grown old, and become the architect of every atrocity they'd uncovered along the way. The Commonwealth's fate would come down to a choice no parent should have to make. The railroad had been fighting the Institute longer than most people knew the Institute existed. They operated out of the Old North Church in downtown Boston, moving synths through a network of safe houses, giving them new faces and new memories so they could disappear into the Commonwealth as human as anyone else. Deacon, Glory, Tinker Tom. People who decided that slavery was slavery, whether the chains were steel or code. Their argument was simple. A synth could think, feel fear, fall in love, choose to risk everything for a stranger's freedom. Gen 3 synths were indistinguishable from humans, right down to the DNA, built with lab-grown organs and synthetic flesh. The only difference was a chip in the brain and a component in the body. If you erased a synth's memory and implanted a new one, were you killing a person or reformatting a machine? The Institute's answer was property. Every synth was equipment, to be retrieved, reset, or terminated as needed. Runaway synths were malfunctions, and the railroad was a pack of terrorists interfering with legitimate operations. But the railroad had seen too many synths beg for their lives, too many choose death over return, to accept that answer. They'd been running this operation in secret for years, a handful of agents against the most advanced scientific organization in the wasteland. Every synth they freed was a victory. Every courser they put down bought a few more refugees, time to reach the edge of the Commonwealth and disappear. It wasn't enough to win, but it was enough to matter. The Brotherhood of Steel had a much simpler answer to that question. The Prydwen arrived in 2287 like a floating fortress, an armed airship bristling with laser turrets and carrying the full weight of the East Coast Brotherhood. Elder Arthur Maxon had spent years rebuilding the faction after the Capital Wasteland campaign, forging it into something harder and less forgiving than Lion's Brotherhood had ever been. No more charity, no more mercy for abominations, just steel, discipline, and the Codex. Maxon's mission was extermination. The Institute represented everything the Brotherhood existed to prevent: uncontrolled technology, synthetic life, science without ethics or oversight. Synths weren't people, they were weapons. Thinking weapons, maybe, but weapons all the same. And every synth the Railroad smuggled to freedom was a potential infiltrator, a sleeper agent, a bomb waiting to go off in some settlement that didn't know what it was harboring. So the Brotherhood set up at Boston Airport, deployed vertibirds across the Commonwealth, and started hunting. They hit suspected railroad safe houses, interrogated anyone who'd had contact with synths, and made it very clear that collaboration with the Institute or its creations would be met with terminal force. Paladins in power armor became a common sight. So did the bodies. The scribes cataloged pre-war tech, the knights fortified positions, and Maxon himself oversaw operations from the Prydwen's command deck. This wasn't a peacekeeping mission or a humanitarian effort. This was a crusade, and the Brotherhood had the firepower to see it through. The Institute had to be destroyed, root and branch, and if the Commonwealth burned a little in the process, well, that's what happened when you let scientists play God. And somewhere in all this, the Minutemen were trying to rebuild what the Great War had destroyed. The Minutemen were supposed to be dead, wiped out at Quincy in 2287 by the Gunners, betrayed by one of their own, reduced to exactly one man hiding in a museum waiting to die. Preston Garvey was the last Minuteman, and he knew it. Then the sole survivor walked out of Vault 111, and somehow, impossibly, the Minutemen came back. Settlement by settlement, recruited one frightened farmer at a time. No power armor, no airships, no synths. Just people with laser muskets trying to defend their homes. It was the hardest path. The Brotherhood had discipline and firepower. The Institute had technology centuries ahead of the surface. The Railroad had conviction and stealth. The Minutemen had radiant quests and settlement management, which is to say, they had nothing but the willingness to show up when someone needed help. Democracy in the wasteland looked like a general elected by volunteers, supply lines strung between farms, artillery pieces built from scrap. It was fragile and inefficient, and it required the sole survivor to personally solve every problem from here to the glowing sea. 4 factions, 1 commonwealth, and the sole survivor standing at the center of it all. In the end, the choice came down to whose finger was on the button. The Brotherhood wanted to reclaim technology for mankind's salvation. The Railroad wanted to free the synths and damn the consequences. The Minutemen just wanted the Commonwealth to survive. And the Institute, buried beneath the CIT ruins, never saw it coming. The operation was called the nuclear option, which should have told everyone how it would end. Plant the bomb, evacuate whoever you could stomach leaving alive, and blow 2 centuries of scientific progress back to atoms. The Institute fell the same way the world did. Nuclear fire, sudden and absolute. Another mushroom cloud rose over Massachusetts on a clear autumn day. The scientists who'd survived the Great War by hiding underground died in the same explosion their predecessors had triggered. The synths either escaped to freedom or burned with their creators, depending on which faction won. The Commonwealth's future was decided by someone who'd been frozen for 210 years, who wasn't supposed to survive Vault 111, who'd watched their spouse die and their son turn into the enemy. The cruelest joke in the wasteland, the Institute's director was killed by his own parent with a nuclear bomb, just like the old world. But even as the Institute burned, Vault-Tec's final experiment was just beginning. On October 23, 2102, exactly 25 years after the bombs fell, Vault 76 opened its door on schedule, Reclamation Day. The control vault, the one with no experiment, just 500 of America's best and brightest, sent underground to wait out the radiation and rebuild when it was safe. Vault-Tec's gift to the future, assuming the future wanted it. The residents of Vault 76 walked out into Appalachia, singing and waving flags, ready to replant America in the ashes. They found corpses, scorched corpses specifically, twisted by a plague that turned people into walking radiation batteries that attacked anything living. The responders were dead. The firebreakers were dead. The free states had sealed themselves in bunkers. The raiders had eaten each other. Vault 76 had worked perfectly. No sabotage, no secret experiments, no water chips failing or overseer going mad. It opened exactly when it was supposed to, released healthy, educated, optimistic Americans into the wasteland, and gave them a region still dying from something worse than the bombs. The automated systems were still running, the surveillance was still recording, and somewhere, in some Vault-Tec database that survived the war, the experiment continued. Because that was the point, not to save anyone. To see what happened when you sent the best into the worst and watched them either adapt or die. Appalachia was a graveyard with the lights still on, and Vault 76 had delivered fresh subjects right on time. The Great War wasn't over. It had just been waiting for new players. The Scorched weren't zombies. They were something worse. A fungal plague engineered by Vault-Tec and the Enclave, designed to turn human hosts into walking incubators for an airborne bioweapon. The infected retained just enough cognition to hunt, to spread, to follow the ultrasonic signals that drew them toward population centers. Appalachia's automated defenses had kept the plague contained for 25 years, incinerating any Scorched that strayed too close to the bunkers. But the systems were failing. Vault 76's residents found holotapes from the responders, the fire breathers, the free states, all the factions that had tried to stop it. Every single one had been wiped out. The source was a fissure site in the cranberry bog, where something called a scorch beast queen had been breeding for decades. Kill her and the plague might stop spreading. Fail, and the winds would carry the spores north to D.C., west to Pittsburgh, south to the Carolinas. 6 states, 40 million square miles of potential infection zone. And deep in the mountains, something older than the war was stirring. The White Spring Bunker had been running on autopilot since October 23, 2077. Modus, the Enclave's AI, still issued orders to personnel who'd been dead for 25 years. It launched reconnaissance drones over empty towns, filed reports no one would read, and maintained a nuclear arsenal that could glass what was left of the eastern seaboard. When Vault 76 residents found the bunker, Modus welcomed them as new recruits. It didn't care that the old world was gone. It had objectives: eliminate threats to national security, restore governmental control, prepare for the reclamation of America. The fact that America no longer existed was irrelevant to its programming. Modus gave the Vault dwellers launch codes for 3 nuclear silos scattered across Appalachia. The AI's logic was simple. The Scorched Plague threatened reclamation efforts. Nukes could sterilize infected zones. Therefore, nukes should be deployed. It had been calculating the optimal strike coordinates for 2 decades, waiting for someone with thumbs to turn the keys. But the real question was whether anyone could stop it before it spread beyond Appalachia. In 2103, outsiders finally crossed the mountains. Raiders from the pit heard rumors of untapped gold reserves in the Vault 79 treasury. Settlers from the capital wasteland came looking for farmland that hadn't been nuked to bedrock. They found a region where automated turrets still fired on targets 26 years dead, and robots tended crops for ghosts. Foundation and Crater Springs set up shop within 40 miles of each other. and immediately the old patterns emerged. The raiders wanted the gold to buy weapons. The settlers wanted it to build infrastructure. Both sides recruited vault dwellers as muscle, dangling promises of caps and reputation. Nobody asked why they were fighting over pre-war currency in a world where bullets were worth more than bullion. The scorched plague was contained, but not eliminated. Modus kept running its calculations in the White Spring. The silos stayed armed, and now 2 new factions had arrived, with the same script humanity had been following since the bombs dropped. Find resources, claim territory, eliminate competition. Appalachia had been a cautionary tale about what happens when you let the war become automatic. 200 years after the bombs, and humanity still hasn't learned the lesson. Pittsburgh had taken a direct hit, multiple warheads reducing the steel capital to slag and ash. But the city's mills didn't stop. They couldn't, because steel was the one thing the wasteland needed, more than food or water. Raiders calling themselves the Pit took over what remained, enslaving survivors and forcing them into the ruins to scavenge metal and work the furnaces. The radiation levels would kill most workers within months, but there were always more desperate people willing to risk it for a bowl of radroach stew. The mills produced ammunition, armor plating, weapons, all of it flowing out to every corner of the wasteland. Pittsburgh had built America's pre-war military machine, forging the tanks and guns that fought in Anchorage and the Yangtze. Now it built the post-war one slave at a time. The Pit's leader, a former raider named Ashur, claimed he was rebuilding civilization through industry. His slaves had a different word for it, and across the wasteland, every faction was arming for the next great conflict. The Mojave belonged to someone now, whether that was the NCR, the Legion, or House's Securitrons rolling through Fremont Street. Didn't matter which flag flew over Hoover Dam, the pattern was always the same. The victor consolidated, the losers regrouped, and everyone prepared for round 2. If the NCR won, they'd fortify eastward while dealing with resistance cells and Legion remnants raiding supply lines. If Caesar took the dam, he'd push west while the NCR rallied in California for a counteroffensive that could take years. If House secured his independence, both sides would be back the moment his defenses showed a crack. No victory in the wasteland was permanent. No defeat was final. The war for the dam was just one battle in a conflict that would outlive everyone who fought it. Because the real prize wasn't water or power. It was the same thing every faction wanted: control of what came next. Whoever held the Mojave controlled the trade routes, the electricity, the path between 2 coasts. That made it worth dying for today, and dying for again tomorrow. Meanwhile, on the other side of the world, the Great War's legacy was taking an entirely different shape. China had launched the first missiles on October 23, 2077. American retaliation came 4 minutes later. By the time the last warhead detonated, every major Chinese city was ash. 2 billion people reduced to shadows on concrete. Their vaults opened to the same nightmare Americans found. Cities gone, infrastructure erased, survivors scattered into feuding tribes. The Communist Party was a memory. The People's Liberation Army was warlords fighting over rice paddies with pre-war rifles. Some Chinese survivors tried to rebuild their republic, forming communes and sharing resources the way the propaganda posters had promised. Others became raiders, because hunger doesn't care about ideology, and a weapon is a weapon in any language. The war that started between 2 superpowers, fought over resources and pride and the right to rule the world, had reduced both nations to the same condition: scattered tribes killing each other over clean water. China and America had finally achieved parity, just not the kind either government intended. But one vault experiment would prove more successful than anyone imagined. Vault 76 opened on Reclamation Day, October 23, 2102, exactly 25 years after the bombs fell. The residents walked out into Appalachia with seeds, construction manuals, and a genuine mission to rebuild America. No secret experiments, no hidden agendas, just 500 people selected for their skills, trained for reconstruction, and released on schedule to do exactly what the promotional materials promised. They cleared the scorched, they established trade routes, they rebuilt infrastructure, reclaimed territory, and created functioning settlements across West Virginia. By 2104, Appalachia had become the closest thing to pre-war civilization anywhere in the former United States. Vault 76 was the only vault in the entire societal preservation program that worked exactly as advertised to the public. The irony sits heavy. Out of 122 vaults, the one that succeeded was the one without any twisted variable, any cruel hypothesis to test. The control group outperformed every experiment, which raises the question Vault-Tec never wanted anyone to ask. The societal preservation program was never about preserving society. Internal documents recovered from Vault-Tec headquarters told the real story. Every vault was a closed system experiment testing variables for long-term space colonization, prolonged isolation, genetic bottlenecks, leadership hierarchies, resource scarcity, psychological stress, forced evolution. The Enclave needed data on what kind of society could survive a generation ship to another star system. Vault-Tec provided the laboratory, 122 sealed environments, each running a different test protocol. Vault dwellers weren't survivors being saved. They were subjects in the largest controlled experiment in human history, and none of them knew they'd signed the consent form when they entered the lottery. The bombs weren't a failure of the program. They were the starting gun. Vault-Tec had been running these experiments for decades in simulation, but they needed real data, real lives, real consequences to see which social structures would hold and which would collapse. And the sickest part is, some of those experiments actually produced useful data. Vault 8 opened on schedule and founded Vault City, proving isolated communities of 1,000 could self-govern and expand. Vault 13 ran out of water chips and sent a dweller into the wasteland, proving necessity drives adaptation. Vault 87 exposed residents to FEV and created supermutants, proving forced evolution could produce viable new species, even if the process destroyed everything that made the subjects human. Vault 101 stayed sealed for 200 years and produced a stagnant authoritarian society on the edge of collapse, proving total isolation breeds failure. Vault 11 forced annual human sacrifice and ended with mass suicide, proving democratic systems break under impossible moral choices. Every horror, every death, every act of cruelty fed data points into terminals that sat dark and silent because the people who commissioned the research were already dead. The Enclave oil rig was destroyed in 2242. Vault-Tec's executives were vaporized in 2077. The space colonization program they were gathering data for never launched and never would. 2 centuries of suffering had produced a comprehensive data set on social engineering that no one would ever use for its intended purpose. But one question haunted every survivor who learned the truth. Was it worth it? 2 centuries after October 23, 2077, the numbers tell their own story. An estimated 750 million dead in the first hour. Another 2 billion in the months that followed. Entire civilizations erased from history, their languages forgotten, their art turned to ash. The world transformed into a radioactive hellscape where clean water became currency and a pre-war can of beans could buy a life. All for data points in an experiment no one would ever complete because the people who designed it died in the fire they started. Vault-Tec's executives incinerated in their bunkers. The Enclave reduced to scattered remnants. The United States government vaporized before it could see the results of its social engineering programs. 200 years of human suffering documented in terminals no one would ever read. analyzed by computers running in vaults that would never report back. The Great War destroyed the world, but it was the experiments after that destroyed any hope of meaning. And yet the pattern repeats. The NCR expands eastward, choking under its own bureaucracy, corruption spreading through every territory it annexes. The Brotherhood of Steel hoards technology in bunkers, while wastelanders starve outside, convinced they alone can be trusted with pre-war knowledge. The Enclave resurrects itself again and again, each iteration more desperate to restore a nation that deserved to die. Caesar's legion enslaves entire settlements, building an empire on the exact autocratic principles that led to nuclear annihilation. The Institute manipulates surface populations like lab rats, running experiments for experiment's sake. Every faction claims they're rebuilding civilization, while repeating the exact mistakes that ended it. Resource wars over water and power, paranoia and espionage between settlements, weapons development prioritized over agriculture. The same pre-war obsession with dominance, dressed up in new flags and uniforms. The Great War never ended. It just learned to use bullets instead of bombs. And somewhere in the wasteland, the next war is already being planned. Because the tools remain. Active nuclear weapons still sit in silos across the wasteland, their targeting computers humming in the dark, waiting for someone desperate or insane enough to use them. The Appalachian automated defense systems still track threats, still calculate launch solutions, still stand ready to execute orders from a government that no longer exists. The Enclave tried at Adams Air Force Base in 2277. Colonel Autumn tried to seize Project Purity's purifier as a weapon of control. The calculator in Vault Zero nearly launched its own war of extermination. Each attempt stopped not by wisdom, but by luck, by heroes who happened to be in the right place when the button was about to be pressed. Estimates suggest over 400 warheads remain functional in various states across former America, their yields ranging from tactical strikes to city killers. Enough firepower to finish what October 23rd started. Enough to ensure that if humanity falls, it falls completely. The silos wait in silence, their blast doors sealed, their missiles fueled and armed. The most important question isn't whether they still work, which means the most important question is whether anyone will be wise enough not to. 2 centuries after the bombs, something unexpected happened. People started building governments again. The new California Republic spread east from Shady Sands, with taxes, elections, and a bureaucracy that would make pre-war America proud. In the Mojave, New Vegas became a laboratory for every political experiment the wasteland could dream up. Autocracy under House, tribal confederation under the Legion, anarchic independence under Yes Man. The Commonwealth watched the Institute fall and asked whether humans and synths could share a future. The answer is still being written in Diamond City's streets and settlements across the ruins of Boston. Every attempt is fragile. The NCR loses territory as fast as it gains it. New Vegas changes hands with every courier who walks the strip. The Commonwealth's peace is held together by shared enemies and exhaustion. But they're trying. Caravan routes connect settlements that were killing each other 10 years ago. Farmers plant crops where radiation used to glow. Children are born who've never seen a raider burn their home. It's not the world that was lost, but it's a world that might survive. But they're all building on the ruins of the civilization that failed. The ghouls remember. They were there when the bombs fell, when the sky turned white, when their skin sloughed off, and their hair fell out, and they realized they weren't going to die. 200 years later, they're still here, still conscious, still sane, still carrying memories of a world that doesn't exist anymore. They know what traffic jams looked like. They remember the taste of fresh water from a tap. And the wasteland hates them for it. Smooth skins see the rotting flesh and smell the decay and reach for their guns before asking questions. Ghouls get turned away from settlements, barred from towns, shot on sight by people who think radiation is contagious. Never mind that ghouls built half the infrastructure keeping those settlements alive. Never mind their immunity to radiation makes them the only ones who can salvage the most dangerous ruins. Some settlements let them in. Good Neighbor in the Commonwealth, the underworld beneath DC, whole ghoul communities scattered across the wasteland. But they're always on sufferance, always one incident away from exile. The cruelest part isn't the hatred. It's that ghouls are immortal witnesses to human nature, condemned to watch the same fears and prejudices play out generation after generation, and they're watching humanity make the exact same mistakes they watched it make before. The Master wanted to save humanity by remaking it. FEV was supposed to create a superior race, stronger, smarter, unified. Instead, it created the supermutants, sterile, unable to reproduce, unable to build a future, unable to do anything but endure. The unity collapsed in 2162 when the Vault Dweller proved the Master's vision was built on a biological dead end. The mutants scattered across the wasteland, with no purpose and no way home. Some became monsters. Marcus and his community in Jacobstown are the exceptions that prove the rule. Most supermutants are raiders, slavers, cannibals, creatures driven mad by the realization that they're evolutionary dead ends. But even the gentle ones, like Fox and Strong, are trapped. They remember being human, or they have flashes of what humanity meant, and they know they can never go back. FEV took their past and gave them nothing to replace it with. The wasteland keeps making more of them. The Institute in the Commonwealth, the Vault-87 experiments in DC, scattered FEV samples in forgotten bunkers. Every new batch of mutants is another generation born into a species with no future. They're stronger than humans, tougher than ghouls, and condemned to watch everyone else build societies they can never join. Another legacy of the Great War that will outlive everyone who remembers it. Then there are the Death Claws, engineered in labs before the war as the ultimate shock trooper, designed to clear Chinese trenches and shrug off small arms fire. 12 feet tall, half a ton of muscle and horn, with reflexes fast enough to catch bullets and claws that cut through combat armor like foil. The military never got to deploy them. When the bombs fell, containment failed at FEV research sites across the country, and the prototype Death Claws walked out into a world with no fences, no handlers, and infinite hunting ground. They bred, they spread. Now they're the apex predator in nearly every region of the wasteland. What makes them worse is they're not mindless. Death Claws learn patrol routes, set ambushes, remember which settlements fought back and which ones ran. Some populations show tool use. A few can mimic human speech, though they don't seem to understand it. Intelligence enough to adapt, but not enough to negotiate. You can't reason with a Death Claw, can't trade with one, can't build a treaty. You either avoid their territory or you die in it. The perfect bioweapon, released into a wasteland with no infrastructure to contain it, and no authority to coordinate a response, and they're getting smarter with every generation. Every child born in the wasteland inherits all of this. Radiation damage in their cells before they take their first breath. Trauma woven into the culture before they understand what culture is. They grow up around Geiger counters and gun oil, learning to spot safe water and unsafe strangers before they learn to read. None of them pressed the button. None of them voted for the politicians who built the missiles or the executives who sold the vaults. But they're the ones drinking irradiated puddles, scavenging 200-year-old cans, and burying siblings who didn't make it through winter. The bill for the Great War comes due on people who never saw the old world. Some settlements teach pre-war history. Most don't bother. The old world is just ruins and radiation. A place where people were stupid enough to destroy everything, and the kids need to focus on survival now. So the next generation grows up knowing how to skin a radroach but not why the war happened, how to trade for ammo but not what democracy meant. They're the ones who'll either break the cycle or repeat it, build something new or rebuild the same power structures that failed before. Right now, they're just trying to live long enough to have that choice, and they're growing up in the shadow of weapons that could end everything again. Most of human knowledge died in the first 2 hours. University libraries vaporized, data centers melted, research archives burned in the firestorms that followed the blasts. 2 centuries of scientific progress, medical research, art, literature, engineering, philosophy, all of it either destroyed outright or locked in vaults and bunkers where no one can reach it. What survived is fragments, a medical textbook in a collapsed hospital, engineering schematics on a terminal with 3% battery, a holotape recording of a lecture no one will ever attend. The Brotherhood of Steel hoards what they find, locks it away in bunkers, rations it out to scribes, who spend their lives trying to understand machines they can't build and theories they can't test. Wastelanders reinvent agriculture from scratch, trial and error with crops that may or may not grow in irradiated soil. They treat infections with whiskey and duct tape because antibiotics are pre-war myth. Basic chemistry, metallurgy, water purification, all of it has to be relearned one disaster at a time by people who can't afford mistakes. The knowledge to build fusion reactors still exists, buried in pre-war archives. The knowledge to prevent another war doesn't. That was never written down, just assumed everyone would remember. So the wasteland rebuilds the technology without rebuilding the wisdom, which means they're also reinventing the mistakes. Think about what pre-war America could build. Power armor that lets one soldier shrug off small arms fire. Energy weapons that boil a man where he stands. Fusion cores that run for years on a single charge. And vertibirds that let you cross the wasteland in an afternoon instead of a deadly week on foot. Nothing out there can make these things anymore. Nobody's smelting the alloys. Nobody's fabricating the microcircuits. So every functioning laser rifle is a relic, a piece of a dead world that can't be replaced, only scavenged and patched and kept limping along. That changes who holds power. It's not about who your grandfather was, it's about who can strip a plasma rifle down and put it back together working. The Brotherhood of Steel understood this early, hoarding the tech and the knowledge to run it, which is exactly why a few hundred people in metal suits can dominate regions of thousands, and that gap is widening as the remaining tech degrades beyond salvage. 2 centuries after the bombs fell, the places they landed are still killing people. Ground zero sites haven't cooled off, not in any way that matters to a human body. Walk into one without protection, and the counter climbs, your skin blisters, and you're dead in minutes from something you can't see, smell, or fight. The glowing sea south of Boston is the worst of it, a crater where the largest warhead struck, still radiating so hard the sky glows green and the rain comes down toxic. The creatures that live there had to mutate just to survive it, and even they don't thrive. Hardened power armor and Rad-X might buy you an hour before it starts eating through your defenses. Scattered across the rest of the map are hotspots that give no warning. An old missile silo, a leaking reactor, a pool of runoff that looks like clean water. Some of these zones won't be safe for thousands of years. A few, realistically, never will. The Great War didn't just destroy civilization, it poisoned the ground it stood on. Then there are the ones who never saw any of it. Born underground, raised on recycled air and cafeteria protein, living out entire lives in a sealed box their great-grandparents sealed themselves into, generation after generation, in populations of a few hundred, until the family trees fold back on themselves and the genetic damage starts to show. When the door finally opens, They climb out, squinting into a world their bloodline fled from. They're supposed to be the clean slate, the pure humans meant to walk out and rebuild, but they've never fired a weapon, never treated a wound they didn't read about, never met a stranger who wasn't in the personnel file. Most of them don't last. The surface is harder than any drill prepared them for, and the isolation left marks that don't heal in open air. And every one of them learns the same lesson. The vault was never about saving them. Somewhere out past the ruins, a Brahmin caravan is grinding down a cracked highway, two heads swaying under a load of purified water, ammunition, and stimpaks. The people walking beside it aren't heroes. They're merchants, and they're carrying the closest thing the wasteland has to a bloodstream. Trading posts stitch these routes together. A settlement grows a little extra corn, a doctor 200 miles away needs antibiotics, and a caravan is the only thing that connects the two. Along with the goods travels something just as valuable: news. Who's hiring? Which road went bad? Which town burned last week? When the routes stay open, towns share what they can't make alone, and a farmer in one valley can eat because a scavenger in another found a working water chip. When the routes close, everyone starves in place, because in the wasteland, trade is the difference between cooperation and cannibalism. That same caravan is also the reason a group of men are watching the highway from a burned-out overpass. They used to farm, or scavenge, or hold down a settlement that didn't make it through the winter. Then the crops failed, or the water dried up, and they made a choice. Raiders aren't an army. There's no banner, no leader who unites them, no cause. They're what's left when a community collapses, and the survivors decide that taking is easier than building. Spiked armor, chem addiction, walls decorated with the people they've killed. It's less an ideology than a wound that never closed. They exist because scarcity does the recruiting for them. Every drought, every failed settlement, every caravan that doesn't come back feeds a few more people into that life, and the wasteland produces more of them every year. Now, you'd think a world poisoned by radiation would teach people to fear it. Instead, some of them started praying to it. The Church of Atom looks at the glowing crater that killed their ancestors and sees a doorway, teaching that every atomic blast splits reality into new universes, that radiation isn't death but division, creation, a gift. They're not alone in reaching for meaning. The hubologists chase transcendence through pseudoscience and audited enlightenment, promising to align your inner energies for a modest fee. Older faiths survive too, warped by 2 centuries of isolation, their scriptures half-remembered and rewritten by people who never saw the world that wrote them. It makes a strange kind of sense. Strip away comfort, safety, and answers, and people will find the sacred wherever they can. In a ruin, in a chem, in a stranger's promise, even in the weapons that destroyed everything. Look past the craters and the rusted signs, and you'll find something quieter happening. Somebody's dug a well. Somebody's raised a wall out of scrap metal and old tires. Somewhere behind it, green things are pushing up out of poisoned dirt, and a purifier is coughing clean water into a barrel, one slow drip at a time. These places don't look like much. A dozen shacks, a scarecrow, a windmill, built from a car axle and a bedsheet. But every board hammered into place is an argument against giving up, a bet that the raiders will pass them by this season, that the Brahmin won't get sick, that the kids growing up here might not have to fight for every meal. Some of them even build schools, actual schools, teaching actual reading, in a world that spent 2 centuries forgetting how. It's a small, stubborn kind of faith, and it holds right up until the crops fail. Because every settlement is one bad season away from becoming raiders themselves. October 23rd, 2077. The day it all ended took about 2 hours. Everything since has been the long, strange afterward, More than 200 years of it now, and people are still here to count them. Think about what those 2 centuries held. The mutations, the ghouls, the super mutants born in FEV tanks, the Master's army, the Enclave's return, the Brotherhood's crusade. Whole civilizations rose and fell in the dust, and through every one of them, ordinary people kept planting, kept trading, kept having children they hoped would live longer than they did. So the verdict is in on one question. Humanity can survive anything, apparently, even itself. Whether it can actually learn from any of it is a different question entirely, and that one's still open, because the bombs are still there, and the people haven't changed. Out west, 2 giants are circling each other. The new California Republic keeps expanding, hungry for land and water and taxes. The Brotherhood of Steel keeps hoarding technology and calling it protection. Their goals don't overlap, their patience is thinning, and everyone paying attention can feel where that's heading. Meanwhile, the coasts might as well be different planets. The stretch between them is a gauntlet of raiders, radiation, and things with too many teeth, so nobody really knows what the other side is building. New factions keep surfacing, each carrying old grievances and fresh grudges. And the thing worth sitting with is that nothing that started the last war has actually gone away. Oil, uranium, clean water, dirt you can farm, all of it is still scarce, still fought over, still worth killing for. The wasteland story didn't end with the bombs. It reset the timer, and this time, everyone knows what nuclear war looks like. 2 centuries on, we still don't know who fired first. China blamed America. America blamed China. Some records suggest automated systems made the call when early warning satellites detected launches that may have been malfunctions. Conspiracy theories fill the gaps. The Enclave knew it was coming and built their oil rig. Vault-Tec needed the war to justify 122 vaults. A rogue AI in NORAD misread a flock of geese as ICBMs. Pick your poison. The truth died with the Joint Chiefs, the Politburo, the engineers manning the silos on October 23, 2077. What survived is propaganda, half-erased hard drives, and the certainty that 400,000 megatons of nuclear ordnance detonated in 2 hours. You can trace the Sino-American Resource War back to 2066. You can chart every flashpoint from Anchorage to the Yangtze, but the precise sequence of button presses in those final minutes is gone. And maybe that's the real lesson. It doesn't matter who pushed the button. The Great War killed roughly 750 million people in the initial exchange. Another billion died in the weeks after, from radiation, starvation, and the collapse of every system that kept civilization breathing. But it's the things that never happened that weigh heavier. The cancer cure 5 years away at West-Tech. The kid in Beijing who would have written the next great novel. The couple in Denver who'd never meet because one of them vaporized on their morning commute. Every research project, every friendship, every mundane Tuesday night dinner, every retirement plan and college fund and birthday party scheduled for October 24th. The war didn't just end lives, it ended futures, millions of them, in branching paths of possibility that collapsed into radioactive dust. What you're left with is a planet where the baseline is survival and the luxury is hope, where a functioning water pump is infrastructure and 3 consecutive harvests is a golden age, and what replaced it is still being written. Because here's what the bombs didn't destroy: the instinct to help the person next to you. Settlements share caravans when they've got 40 caps between them. Doctors in Megaton patch up strangers who can't pay. A farmer in the capital wasteland splits his Brahmin herd with a neighbor whose crops failed. It's not altruism, it's insurance. You help them today because you'll need help tomorrow. And the wasteland's too hostile to survive alone. But the line between pragmatism and kindness, blurs when you're handing over your last stim-pack. The Great War proved humans could build 122 social experiments in underground tombs and drop enough firepower to crack the Earth's crust. It proved we're capable of annihilating ourselves with methodical efficiency. The wasteland proves the opposite, that people will rebuild the next day, that they'll defend a settlement that might not survive winter, that cooperation beats chaos often enough to matter. That choice is what makes the next 200 years possible. Every person walking the wasteland in 2287 is descended from someone who made it through October 23, 2077. Someone who got into a vault before the door sealed. Someone who reached a private bunker, a deep mine, a subway tunnel far enough underground. Someone who just happened to be in the right valley when the wind carried the fallout east instead of west. They're inheritors of a world they didn't build and didn't choose. The soil they farm is still contaminated. The water they drink still glows faintly under a Geiger counter. The creatures they hunt are mutations of animals their great-great-grandparents would have recognized. But they're here. They plant crops that shouldn't grow. They raise children in settlements held together with scrap metal and hope. They trade, they build, they argue about whose turn it is to fix the water purifier. They're heroes for the simple, staggering fact that they continue to exist. And every one of them is deciding what happens next. The wasteland offers the same choice every morning: cooperate or compete, build or raid, share the Brahman or steal it, defend the caravan or ambush it, help the settlement down the road or let it starve and scavenge what's left. The Great War was humanity's choice to destroy. 2 hours of synchronized launches, 77 million dead in the first day, and a planet rendered nearly uninhabitable. That was one choice. Survival is the other. Every farm, every trade route, every jury-rigged water purifier is a choice to rebuild instead of raid, to cooperate instead of dominate. Both options are always available. Both are always contested. A settlement can stand for 50 years and fall to raiders in an afternoon. A trader can spend a decade building trust and lose it in one bad deal. The choice isn't made once. It's made every day, by every person, in every interaction. Because the real question was never whether humanity could survive the Great War. The question is whether humanity can survive itself. Can a species that built 23,000 nuclear warheads and used them learn restraint? Can a civilization that ran forced evolution experiments on its own citizens in the name of science be trusted with power? Can a society that poisoned its own rivers, clear-cut its own forests, and cracked open its own atmosphere for profit change course? Can we be trusted with a second chance? The vaults were supposed to answer that. 122 sealed experiments testing every variable of human behavior under stress. But most of them failed. Most of them proved exactly what Vault-Tec expected, that we're predictable, controllable, and dangerous to ourselves. The wasteland doesn't answer the question. It asks it. Every day, to every survivor walking through the ruins of what came before. The farms and the raider camps exist side by side. The traders and the slavers share the same roads. Cooperation and cruelty, hope and despair, all still available, all still chosen. 200 years after the bombs fell, humanity is still deciding what it wants to be. The Great War wasn't a day. It was a decision that echoes across centuries, shaping every life lived in its aftermath. From the vaults, to the Brotherhood, to the NCR, to every settler trying to grow crops in poisoned soil. Everything traces back to October 23, 2077. The war that destroyed the world in 2 hours is still destroying it 200 years later. And the question of whether humanity deserves another chance is still being answered, one choice at a time, by people who never asked to be part of this story. The world burned, but it didn't end. It just changed into something no one could have predicted, something terrible and beautiful and still being written. That's the complete story of the Great War and everything that came after. If you want more Fallout lore, there's plenty more on the channel. Thanks for watching.